2 years ago at the same conference, and thank you very much again for giving me the opportunity to present. I presented our actually national well-being system representation for also using the OECD data, but at that time it was completely qualitative. So it was a causal loop diagram connecting about 60 indicators and having 200 links. So now we are trying to validate it for using the data. And one of the steps is actually trying to identify what are the patterns in this well-being data. And so for introduction, we consider it's essential that the well-being is a multidimensional concept. So as Kun today already mentioned, this is well acknowledged. And we also stress the importance of well-being frameworks. So well-being dashboards, which help decision makers to measure national progress beyond traditional economic indicators. So yes, again, we can report to Stiglitz report. And there's also a global shift observing towards comprehensive well-being metrics such as Better Life Index, Happy Planet Index, gross national happiness, and so on. And many countries have already adopted different multidimensional well-being metrics into national policymaking. And for us as a system scientist, it's essential to explore interactions among these different well-being dimensions. And we believe that understanding this interaction can help to convey better and impactful policies fostering well-being in multiple dimensions. So in particular, research objective of this hobby project is to identify the patterns of well-being across different countries and contexts, and also to understand how these patterns were affected by major socio-economic events like Great Recession or European debt crisis and COVID-19. And we used OECD national well-being data, so well-being framework, and in particular, How is Life dataset. This is publicly available. And for methods, we used simple methods as correlation analysis, panel data analysis, and here I will focus more on panel data clustering. So OECD well-being framework consists of 3 topics and 15 dimensions. So 11 dimensions dedicated to current well-being averages and current well-being inequalities, and 4 capitals dedicated to future well-being resources. So these are natural, human capital, economic, and social capital, and these 11 dimensions are also aligned with these 4 capitals. And this particular work, we started to study the current well-being averages because they are most straightforward to interpret, and also they have the best data availability. But the data availability actually is an issue. So if you're going down from dimensions to indicators, there are overall about 80 indicators in the database, and 67 of them are related to current well-being. And there also OECD highlights so-called headline indicators, so 12 indicators for each group. So the most important from their point of view, and also with the best data availability. But however, even for these headline indicators, more than 57% of all possible data points are missing. And the availability of this data really varies between different countries and indicators. So as you can see here, some indicators, the data availability is almost perfect. Just 1 year or 2 years are missing. But for some indicators, the data availability is really poor. So, for example, time spent in social interactions, only for some countries, they have 1 data point or 2 data points. So many countries that don't have any data points at all. And so we decided for a first step to do linear interpolation for missing years country by country. So we don't use any inter-country imputation. And then we exclude the countries which have no data for particular indicators completely. And so what happened, we have to exclude quite many data points, but for using clustering methods, we actually we have to use data without any gaps. And so eventually we have 25 out of 40 countries left, which are in the data set, and 9 of 12 indicators left, which cover actually 9 of 11 dimensions, because one of the dimensions has 2 indicators, household income and household wealth. And essentially we have a data for intersection between OECD and EU countries plus UK. And we don't have data for Romania, Croatia, Bulgaria, because they're not part of the OECD. So this is just some really simple start as a correlation. So we looked just to see what which of our links in the causal loop diagram can be supported by correlations, and we see that actually all indicators except for housing affordability, they do correlate for the whole data set with life satisfaction. And homicide obviously correlate negatively. Others are correlated positively, but so this is I think interesting because once we cluster the data, this picture would be completely different. Especially if you can see like one of the strongest correlation here is between life satisfaction and household income. But I think it's one of the well-known facts that after reaching some income, it doesn't actually. It doesn't bring any more life satisfaction, and then we will see what happens actually once we cluster the countries with this correlation. And we can see also here the income is correlated with life expectancy, life satisfaction, and water turnout. But I think it's important also to say that these are OECD countries, or European OECD countries, so these countries are already by definition high-income countries. So also for us, it was quite surprising that here a correlation was quite strong. Okay, it's after all just correlation, but still it was interesting to see such a high value. And then we proceed to our methods. So with k-means clustering, so standardized data for each indicator. So I think in the first talk we have seen how it is done with z-scores. And the clustering, we repeat it for each year separately. And the optimal number of clusters is 3 clusters based on the silhouette score, one of the common methods to choose the number of clusters for most of the year. For some of the years it was 2, for most of the years it was 3. So we decided to have 3 clusters just for interest. And then we applied also principal component analysis to reduce the dimensionality of our data. And then we can rank the indicators by the explained variance and visualize the cluster evolution over time. Just we chose for this purpose 2 principal components. And this is how our clusters actually look like. I think this is one of the most interesting figures. So these are clusters over time. So these are years and these are countries. And we see so many countries, they're in the same cluster for the whole period of analysis. But some of the countries, they actually do change their cluster positions. And generally, we can say after analysis of the indicators that if we consider well-being as a composite indicator, then so we're going from a high well-being on the left-hand side to the low well-being on the right-hand side. But inside each cluster, the countries, they align just alphabetically. And several groups of countries, as I mentioned, they stay in the same group for the whole period, so we can consider them as clusters of clusters. And the first of this group are countries with high levels of all well-being indicators. And then there's also a group of consistent in the middle, and then there are also some transition groups which teach clustering between several moments. And the fifth group, it always stays with the Baltic countries always stay on the same cluster. And so here we see these groups of countries which stay in the same 5 groups of countries, and then there are also some countries in the middle which don't belong to a whole. They don't exhibit concrete pattern for all period of time. So we see, for example, France, Great Britain, Ireland, they're close to a cluster number 2, but still sometimes they switch to cluster 1. And these can attribute this to European debt crisis and Great Recession. So this is particular years when these countries, especially Ireland, was not doing well. But then it was able to recover, and after 2013 was always part of the second cluster. And also we see the COVID-19, for example, for Czechia, it was quite detrimental. So it was for some time in cluster number 2, but then it jumped cluster number 0 with the worst indicators. And then we see actually Portugal and Slovenia, they did quite well, but actually it's only 2021, as we know it, for many countries which dealt with the first wave of COVID quite good. The second and the third waves were much worse. And then actually the data 2022, probably there will be also some interesting differences, but the data is not available yet for all countries. And then we proceed to principal component analysis. So having all these 9 indicators, we try to choose 2 components based on them, and total variance explained by these 2 components is about 60%. And this is actually we did just a mean. So we did a mean for 2 principal components, and if we do it actually every year, then the total variance will be still about 60%. So this analysis is in this sense quite robust, but actually the weights, the loadings of each component, they change over time. I will have time, I will also show this. And so we choose a key future, so whereas one common threshold is 0.4, so for the first principal component, there are 3 components exceeding this value. So with a household income, life expectancy, and life satisfaction. So this can be attributed some socio-economic well-being and having and being parts of a framework. So this is quite close to actually human development index, but human development index will also have years of schooling, which in our case is actually in principal component 2. So this about employment, education, quality, it can be attributed to the doing part of a well-being. Having, doing, loving, and being framework. So here we can see that these 2 components, they have a leading role in the principal component 2. And now, from my point of view, is another interesting picture. So we can able to show the trajectories of the countries from each group. So by group, it's not only a cluster, but how actually, if they stay in the same cluster or change their position. So there are 5 groups of countries, and we see on these 2 principal components how they move over time. And we can see that actually countries which were in the 5th group, so we were originally with the lowest well-being values of indicators, they were actually doing quite well. And then as we see, so countries actually moving left. So generally the income, life satisfaction, and life expectancy, they do improve over time. And if they move up, so then the employment and student skills and science improve over time. And we can see that all countries except actually Greece, they do move to the left, and Greece actually the only country which moved to the right from 2004 to 2021. So yeah, this is well known, connected with the debt crisis. And then we can see that actually, if you consider employment and student skills, then we have different trajectories. So many of the countries moved up, but many of the countries actually moved down. So employment prospects in these countries, they were declining, so level of employment, and also the student skills in science. Actually, OECD has also data on student skills in reading and maths, but then yeah, they're actually highly correlated. That's why probably it's only indicator suggested as a headline. And also we can see that the countries from a top cluster, they also move some advance in terms of life satisfaction, income, and life expectancy, but we also see further these are not so trivial as it's shown here. So here we can see that all trajectories were only moving in the top, except for Luxembourg, actually also demonstrated decline. Then we can also measure discrepancy between the clusters and within the clusters. So this can be some measures about intra and inter-country inequalities. So if we measure the total distance between all cluster centroids, we can see actually that it's almost monotonously decreases over time, showing that the cluster centroids are converging. But we can also see that after the Great Recession and European debt crisis and during COVID, there was some stagnation or even some decrease in this convergence. And a similar picture is observed for density. So these are how the countries, how far away they are from a cluster centers. It shows inequality within the clusters. And we see that actually the cluster with the lowest well-beings improved over time. And then this density before COVID, it converged almost to one value. It showed that this clustering actually worked quite well in the sense that each of a cluster represented the countries quite close to each other, but more distant from each other. So we can also see the numbers. Yeah, here the numbers are dimensionless, but we show the magnitude. So here we see 2 units and here 6 units. And then we can go further and try to explore the patterns of each group, which exhibits for years. So we first study key principal component 1 components. So these are household income, life expectancy, and life satisfaction. And we can see that the income actually, the group 1 consistently performs better than other groups in almost all these 3 indicators, but it's interesting that the income is growing for group 1 and groups 4 and 5 with the original lowest well-being, but it's kind of stagnating for groups 2 and 3. So it's Spain, Greece, Italy, Slovakia, Portugal, and Slovenia. So here we see that actually these groups 4 and 5 almost were caught up with these countries. And speaking about life expectancy, so here we see that groups 1 to 3, they consistently perform better, and groups 4 and 5, yeah, they catch up, and eventually 4 and 5 they converge. But all groups, they were affected by COVID, but groups 4 and 5 were affected stronger than groups 1 to 3. And finally, I think it's interesting about life satisfaction. So groups, originally the life satisfaction in group 1 was much higher than in all other 4 groups, but towards the end of our time period, so it's almost convergence. So for group 1, the life satisfaction actually slightly decreased, and for all other groups, it showed an increasing trend. So it's interesting what happens further. And the principal component 2, so here we have employment and student skills in science, and we can see at employment that the Great Recession, European debt crisis affected the employment of various groups of countries in a different way. So we see again the group 2 faced the largest challenges, but the groups 4 and 5, group 4 also faced a decline, but actually after it, group 4 converged and reached, and group 5 as well converged and reached almost the level of group 1. And group 2 still stayed significantly lower than these all other groups. And the student skills, we see a similar picture that the first 4 groups are almost converging, even actually group 4 exceeding the values for group 1. And the group 2 yeah, demonstrated significantly a lower students' skills in science for a whole period, and it was not able to catch up towards the end of a time period. And then if you go to correlations again, what correlations these are all for each group separately, yeah, they are really different values. So we have to study to apply probably more sophisticated models. But what we see here is correlation between life satisfaction and household income. It demonstrates actually almost a monotonous trend. We see that for the top group, there is a negative correlation, 0.29. For groups 2 and 3, where it's significant, there's absent. There's no significant correlation, the level of 5% of significance. And then for groups 4 and 5, we can see that it's positive, and especially in group 5, it reaches 0.65. And then we can see, of course, some common patterns like homicides almost everywhere are negatively correlated with all other outcomes, except for, for group 1, we have a really quite a strong correlation with student skills in science. Yeah, this is interesting to study. And then, I won't go into details for the sake of time, but I outlined a future possible research direction from my point of view. So we, of course, have to analyze the sensitivity of a k-means result because it strongly depends on from which point we are starting. Then we can also apply this to other dimensions of OECD well-being framework, so to inequalities, to future well-being. We can also, of course, mix these indicators. We can also apply it to subnational regions, like to provinces, for example, or specific population groups where data is available, like different genders or different occupation groups. And also, of course, we can try to employ more sophisticated methods like time series clustering methods. So when we apply clustering to entire data set without slicing it, for example, K-shape. And preliminary conclusions at this point that European countries they exhibit, of course, various well-being patterns, but these patterns for several countries they have quite close patterns, and they can be clustered to some meaningful clusters, which, from our point of view, can also help to inform some kind of cohesion policies. Because, for example, if we go here, we can see that some of the countries actually they were like, for example, if we take Poland, after like it reached the point at which Czechia was in some, like I think 2017, 18. So it can also try to inform a trajectory, like if we would like to develop actually in a proper direction, what should we do? Which policies should we actually implement in order to move in the right direction, following the countries which moved in a improving their well-being, because of course not all these countries they do have well-being policies implemented, but some of them do have. So these countries can potentially learn from these policies. And also these the principal components they can be used as a basis for composite well-being indicators. But I think we already have many composite indicators. So, but this is just an opportunity So thank you very much. And if you have any questions or feedback, I'm really looking forward to.
So unfortunately, we're 5 minutes into the coffee break already. So I think we can take one question. Otherwise, we move into the coffee break. Okay.
You can also reach me out in the coffee break.
Yeah, that Francesco's suggestion solution works. So Francis and Chris, why don't you guys can ask your questions, and then Nikita can respond in the break.
So just I was thinking that the OECD database was inspired by the Sen, Stiglitz, and Fitoussi report. But somewhere, in fact, you are talking about having and being, but Sen just going to be and to do, which is a little bit different. So if you can just explain that.
Okay, yeah.
I have 3 questions. I don't really know why we're asking, but I'll try and be brief. You cut me off if you like, Elsie. I actually didn't understand how you identify, how you connect clusters across time with each other. I thought that you're running your k-means separately for each year. So if each cluster is defined by centroid, they're not the same from one year to the next, but you somehow have colored them in a consistent way. You can flip the sign of PC1 if you like. You get the choice of sign. It might be nicer if you did that. And you probably know from the World Happiness Report this year that the age profile of those life satisfaction trends could be quite revealing. If you separate old and young, those countries are doing different things.
The first question you respond to makes sense for everybody.
You mean about
the clusters?
The clusters, yeah. Okay, so we did the clustering for every year separately, but then actually, and of course, the centroids are also different in every year. And then we see which countries actually they stayed in the same cluster in the 2 consecutive years, or if they don't stay in the same cluster. So if they stay in the same cluster, then we put them in the one group. If they didn't stay in the same cluster, we didn't put them in the one group.